Hi, I'm Monica Healy. Welcome to Fertivity and to our Fertility Friends interview series. For more interviews like this, visit fertivity.com. I hope you enjoy this interview.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Fertility Friends. I'm your host, Elisa Beckwith, and today our guest is nutritional consultant Kathryn Flynn, who is also author of the cookbook, Cooking for Fertility Friends, To Nourish Your Fertile Soul. It's a book that offers a very simple approach to eating for fertility. It combines modern science with the ancient wisdom of traditional Chinese medicine. Kathryn Flynn is also the founder of fertilefoods.com. Kathryn, welcome to the show. Thank you for speaking with us about such an important topic today.
Thank you for having me. So happy to be here.
Kathryn, you have the unique experience of being on both sides of the nutrition for fertility coin, having been both a patient and now a practitioner and nutritional consultant. Tell us a little bit about how you got into fertility nutrition.
Sure. I was so lucky. I actually had a girlfriend who was about 10 years older than me, and she'd been struggling to conceive for probably 6 or more years. And we were standing in her kitchen, and she was reading a magazine, and she found the retreats, the fertility retreats that Dr. Randine Lewis does, the author of The Infertility Cure. And she asked me, what do you think of this? And I said, well, retreats at a spa, you should definitely go. So she went to Randine's retreats, and they became good friends, and she eventually invited her back to the house. So that's when I met Randine. It was far before I was ever thinking of having babies, but I'd always had an irregular cycle. So Randine was the first person to introduce me to acupuncture and herbs, which completely regulated my cycle and set me on the path to working with her, eventually writing with her, and her asking me to take over her nutrition programming because it was already a deep interest of mine. Then I went to the Paul Pitchford course, which he wrote a book called Healing with Whole Foods, which is an amazing Bible for anyone interested in just nutrition and Chinese medicine principles of nutrition. He spent about 8 years writing it. He's incredible. And I took his course and combined his teaching on healing with whole foods with Randine's infertility cure and combined it into the cookbook.
Wow, what an interesting journey. Tell us a little bit about what you do and the philosophy behind the nutritional consultations that you do. I understand that you have a 3-pronged approach where you use exercise, food, along with a combination of lifestyle to create what becomes a very comprehensive fertile nutrition plan.
Yes, Paul Pitchford especially, when I trained with him, and I really do believe this, that the foundation for any good healthy eating plan is what you do each day to relax and how you move your body. And without those 2 elements, it's really difficult to make good food choices. So when I work with clients one-on-one, I really try and come up with a holistic plan that helps them to create a new rhythm to their lifestyle and really supports healthy choices for awareness practices, exercise, and nutrition.
Kathryn, you blend in a lot of Chinese dietary therapy into your recipes and nutritional consults. For listeners who may not be familiar with Chinese dietary therapy, can you tell us a little bit about what it is and how it's helpful for nutrition?
Sure. So Chinese medicine is wonderful because, as I mentioned with my nutritional approach, it looks at the whole body rather than one aspect. So oftentimes I'll work in concert with an acupuncturist or come up with a diagnosis based on a number of different factors. And then you can really use some specific healing foods to address what's going on with the individual. So generally what I do is I come up with, I start with the basics of the spleen Qi diet, which is the principles of digestion. So how we absorb and distribute nutrients in the body. And that's the most important thing to address when you're looking at diet. So on top of that, individuals, they may have 3 or 4 different other diagnoses. Liver qi stagnation is a popular one. Liver qi stagnation translates to kind of PMS or stress. And you can add some really nice herbs and spices to kind of get that stagnation moving. It can seem a little bit complicated from the get-go, but it's really quite simple, and it's a really beautiful way to address specific symptoms that are coming up.
What role does having a non-restrictive, pleasurable diet for fertility play, and how important is it?
I think it's absolutely mandatory, because anyone who's ever been on a restrictive diet where they feel like they're forbidden from eating certain foods, generally what happens is, they get really excited about it and they'll do it for a little while, and then they have kind of the yo-yo effect of bouncing back into old habits. Because whenever you overly restrict anyone, it's the natural tendency to go the other way. So in my consultations, one of the most important things I focus on are, what are some of your favorite foods, and what alternatives can we find that give you the same effect but are better choices in essence. One example, for instance, is, I want to say I also believe in moderation. So there's not, it's almost a good enough diet, but there's certain things that you can't make a case for. Diet sodas contain aspartame, chemicals that have certainly been linked to fertility issues. So when I come across someone who's having soda every day, I'll say, okay, well, we need to get rid of that. But, how about trying out something like, there's a brand out there called Zevia. And the Zevia is a soda flavored with stevia. So if you really need a soda fix, that's a nice alternative to have. Because you really want to stay expansive and you want to create a lifestyle that feels so pleasurable that it's something that you want to continue even beyond the fertility journey. While you're pregnant, you bring it to the family table with your children too, because it's healthy for everybody.
Kathryn, it's good to hear you mention the importance of having a non-restrictive diet, but also replacing those things with healthier alternatives. And you just gave us a good example with a replacement for diet soda with the Zevia that's flavored with stevia. Can you give us some more examples of some foods that you would maybe perhaps not recommend, and give us some good replacements for them?
Sure. The only thing that I recommend people do 100% when they're embarking on this style of eating is cutting out gluten. I think it's a nice thing to give a real go-to, and if you continue to have a little bit in your system, you'll never feel how good you feel without it. So when I'm talking about replacements, I'm talking about finding, you might come up and you have a birthday. So what do? Well, certainly there are so many good gluten-free products out there that you can go and you can make it from scratch too. You can make a gluten-free cake. So really, with gluten, you want to do 100%. There's also cow dairy is one of the things that I suggest omitting, and goat dairy is a good alternative. The protein structure is different, so goat dairy can be Sorry, I'm going to just start over on that. I suggest omitting cow dairy because the protein structure is more complicated and can cause dampness in the system, so it's more difficult for our bodies to digest, whereas goat dairy is a little easier. Obviously, refined sugars, we just talked about that with the soda, but excessive amounts of any sugar or sweeteners in the diet is not desirable. So, using some of the same forms is fine in moderation, but you really want to make it in small amounts. Also, alcohol is another thing that comes up a lot, and I think it's good to minimize your alcohol intake, but also important, if you're out at a party or a celebration, having a little bit of wine, your body can process it, and sometimes it's a lot easier than having everyone asking you, why aren't you having wine, or, are you pregnant, or all of these different things. So you really have to find your comfort level with things. And what I find is when you get really, stressed and restrictive with your diet, it's actually having the alternative alternate effect on you. So how you eat is just as important as what you're eating. And I guess the last one I want to mention is coffee. So coffee can really burn out your adrenals. And if we're thinking with fertility of really rebuilding your baseline energies, you want to think of filling yourself back up. So hydrating yourself. Coffee is dehydrating. It taxes the liver. And obviously it can also burn out the adrenals by providing kind of this false lift of energy. So you're tired, you have some coffee, it lifts you up for a minute, but then you crash and you need more coffee or something of the like, or sugar. And so you really want to fill yourself up that you have that baseline energies through things like green smoothies, properly hydrating yourself with, if you want a guideline for water, it would be half your body weight in ounces per day of room temperature water, and herbal teas as well.
Kathryn, I know that there's a great deal of information that's available now regarding fertility and how to increase fertility through things like diet. Do you hear a lot of fertility diet myths? And how beneficial is this information that we're getting from our friends and our family and, of course, the internet?
Well, I think we're in a technological age where we're so lucky to have all the information we need at our fingertips, but it can also be information overwhelm. And it's the same thing with our family and friends. Everyone has an opinion on what we should be doing, what we could be doing differently. And so it is important to discern what feels right for you. Certainly, when I work with clients, I hear some funny things. There was a big study done about the importance of dairy. And so I was talking to one client who said, and in this particular interview, and I saw it myself, they said, dairy's great for you, so eat more ice cream. And so I was talking to a client and she said, well, I don't even like ice cream, but I have my husband going out every night to buy me a pint of ice cream and I'm sitting and forcing myself to eat it. And I said, well, that's probably not the best idea since ice cream is completely loaded with sugar. And also it's cold and dampening. And for Chinese medicine digestion, you really want to favor foods that are cooked and warming so it doesn't shut down the digestive fire. So that was one example of kind of a little bit of a myth. And if there was a way to say that ice cream was the best food for fertility, I'm sure I would have figured it out because everyone loves ice cream. But the other one was, which is true, that pineapple contains bromelain, which is helpful with inflammation and also with implantation. So I had one client who, detested pineapple, but was eating an entire pineapple a day. And I suggested, well, if you don't like pineapple, maybe don't force yourself to do that. And a whole pineapple is probably excessive anyway, so you could take a good supplement with bromelain in it, like wobenzyme. So there's definitely a lot of information out there, and sometimes it can be hard to sift through it. So you want to find some information sources or some people that you can trust.
Let's look at the role of the various intolerances that people may have in their diets and how it plays in fertility. For example, people who may be lactose intolerant. Do you suggest that people get any sort of food and drink intolerance testing done that would help optimize our diet? I know earlier you mentioned replacing some things with some great gluten-free recipes. So what about this testing, and is it something that you suggest that we do?
Yes, I have a lot of clients, especially that are working with naturopaths, that come with kind of extensive food testing, and I think it's great information to have. A lot of the work that I do is directly with a few specific things. So I also believe that you can test foods on yourself by taking them out of your diet for a while and then putting them back in and seeing how you feel. And I think that can be just as reliable if you are willing to omit the foods over time. And it's effective because, for instance, with gluten, once you've cut it out, say 6 weeks or 3 months, and really made sure to cut it out 100%, when you put it back in your body, small symptoms like feeling sluggish, feeling tired, having aches in your joints, subtle things that you may have never noticed before digestive-wise pop up. And that makes you not want to eat it anymore. So it can almost be more effective than some of the food testing for compliance from the client. Because when you really feel it and experience it in your own body, you're more likely to continue with the healthy diet choices. That said, if you're working with a great naturopath and, you can get all of the food testing done, I think that can be a wonderful tool too. And sometimes some of the foods that show up on those tests are really interesting. People who've been eating eggs every day for breakfast and they show up with an egg intolerance, and perhaps they take those out and then they feel better than they have in months. So some of the foods that we are sensitive to can also be some of the foods that we're really drawn to. So sometimes you see with kids, especially if they have an intolerance towards wheat or an intolerance towards dairy, mac and cheese may be one of their favorite foods. They're really drawn to it and they want to overeat it. And so that can also be a sign of a food sensitivity or food intolerance.
Kathryn, how important is eating organic foods?
I think it's one of the most important things you can do. I think it's particularly important when you're consuming animal products like meats and dairy. And I think that for some people, the issue is the expense. So oftentimes in the cookbook, I wrote about a little solution of vinegar and water that you can use to wash off the fruit and vegetables. And so that's one alternative you can use, but whenever possible, attempt to get the organic foods because the pesticides and the chemicals and all the things present in non-organic foods can definitely disrupt our endocrine system.
What about people who may be vegan or vegetarian? Do you have any nutritional advice for them?
The most important thing for vegetarians and vegans is to make sure they're getting adequate of the B vitamins, particularly the B12, which is mostly found in the meats. So you want to be really taking a high quality supplement to make sure that you're getting that in your system. You can also do things like tempeh, which has a good source of B12, and some vegetarians will do eggs, which is good. And I want to just say one more thing about supplementation. There's a wonderful guide called the Comparative Guide to Supplements. It's a Canadian study that was done that rated a variety of multivitamin supplements from 0 to 5, I think on 13 different factors, including absorbability. And it's really important to make sure what you are taking is at least a 3.5 out of 5, if not a 5 out of 5. Because when you get down to a 0 or a 1, you really have to wonder if it's if the supplement is doing more harm than good.
That's very good advice. When we're looking at nutrition and we're looking at supplements, we're trying to make sure that we have a very well-rounded diet. Do you suggest that we focus on breaking that nutrition down into a specific macronutrient level? For example, maybe a certain percentage of carbohydrates, a certain percentage of fats or protein. Is there an ideal percentage that we should be aiming for?
It's a good question, and I'll tell you, I get a lot of people wanting to measure and quantify, and there's definitely a lot of information, but I'll tell you how I look at it from a Chinese medicine perspective. I look at it like this. If you filled your plate with good food, it would look like this. So half your plate would be filled with cooked, grilled, steamed veggies. Then you'd have a little bit of grains, so brown rice or quinoa, and then a palm-sized portion of protein. That's kind of how I look at it rather than breaking it down into specific percentages. And then I always tell clients and anyone to make sure at every meal and snack, particularly snacks in between meals, that they're always having a protein and a carbohydrate balance. So that might look like some rice crackers with some hummus, a little bit of goat cheese on crackers, anything that steadies. The carbohydrate will spike your blood sugar. The protein is what keeps your energy steady over time. So a little bit of gluten-free toast with some nut butter or a little bit of fruit with some nut butter. These are the things that will stabilize you through the day.
So you've just mentioned the importance of having the protein in the diet. are there certain sources of protein that we should focus on? For example, would the plant-based protein be a better approach, or perhaps animal source? Do you have a preference?
I think that it depends on the person. I think a lot of people who are very, very deficient can benefit from some good organic grass-fed beef and meats. Overall, I think getting good vegetarian sources of protein like beans and lentils is very important. And for the general public, then having, if you are a meat eater, having, small palm-sized portions of organic beef, chicken, wild salmon, and these type of things. I would say the vegetarian protein would be the first, and then the fish and the chicken, and then the beef, and making sure it's all organic and grass-fed and wild.
So as we're looking at our diet and we're playing with the foods, you mentioned earlier sometimes the best way to see what's going to be best is to maybe remove it out of your diet for a little while.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any signs or symptoms that our body will give us that might give us an indication that perhaps we're lacking or maybe even overdoing it in some particular area of nutrition?
That's a good question. So I would say when you take out a lot of these things, so for instance, when I talk to clients and they take out some cow dairy, gluten, and the refined sugars and the coffee, one of the things that definitely happens is it can impact your sleep patterns, and you can have deeper sleep, especially without the coffee and the sugar. And a lot of the time you don't know how it's impacting you while you're doing it, so you can't feel the agita, you can't feel the kind of restlessness. You may be having small bouts of insomnia, but you're not relating it to the cup of coffee that you had earlier on in the day. So certainly by partaking in a really clean diet for a little while, you can see how your body shifts and changes in its rhythm. And definitely, if you're looking to resolve certain symptoms, for instance, clients with digestive issues, some suffering from constipation, by adding in specific foods and making some dietary changes, that can be, resolved. As you're looking to work with your skin on top of fertility, helping to move any stagnations, for instance, if you're having acne breakouts or dry skin, there's two different ways you could look at the stagnations, or you could look at the blood deficiency and really, with the dry skin, building up the oils in your body. So are you taking a high quality omega? Are you eating lots of avocados, olive oil, coconut oil, some of these things? So without addressing every single set of symptoms, because that's one thing that does happen. When I work with fertility clients, it's never really just about fertility. There's other things going on, whether it's autoimmune conditions, digestive disorders, skin conditions. Oftentimes there's a weight loss component to it. So it's really beautiful to come up with a plan that treats every aspect of the person, and through the relaxation, the exercise, and then specifics with food.
Kathryn, we've been talking so much about things that are good for our diets and things that may not be. And you just mentioned some really good oils. For those of us who cook with oils, other than the couple of oils that you mentioned, are there any other ones that you would suggest would be really good to have in the kitchen and on hand at all times?
I, of course, love olive oil, but I don't cook with it at high heat. So I've been using coconut oil, as I mentioned. I know a lot of clients that like to use the avocado oil, some of the nut oils. The most important with those is not to cook them at high heats because they can get rancid. Also with the flaxseed oil, which is another nice one that contains a high dose of omegas. So with some of those GLA oils too, the evening primrose, the flax oil, you want to put it on after you cook your foods. And when I mention avocados, I'm actually talking about eating half an avocado a day, like the actual avocado fruit. It's amazing for your skin. I actually think it's one of the best foods with the monounsaturated fats that you can eat for fertility. And interestingly, a lot of people say to me, well, what about consuming all these fats? Will I gain weight? And one of my favorite stories is that at Weight Watchers, sometimes when they have clients that hit a plateau, they ask them to eat half an avocado a day, because good fats actually fuel our system and help us to properly metabolize other foods, so it won't cause us to gain weight. It actually does wonderful things for our system. It's also important to note that being underweight for fertility has been shown to be an issue, so you really want to make sure your BMI is in a healthy range. And if you're underweight, including a lot of good nuts, a lot of good oils too, can help you balance out to a healthy weight.
Let's talk about some of the things that should be avoided when we're trying to conceive. Do you have any tips or tricks that will help us stick to a diet that will help us optimize our fertility? I mean, are there any types of simple things that we should keep in mind when we're shopping to help keep us on track?
When you're at the grocery store, one of the best things you can do is stay at the perimeter of the grocery store. So you'll notice a lot of the internal aisles are the places where they have the junk food, the things that we don't need. But really, going around the perimeter, paying special attention to the vegetable section, vegetables and fruits, choosing lots of vegetables and fruits in all the different colors of the rainbow. When we do that, we really ensure that we're getting nutrients and vitamins and minerals that we need. I love to tell people to stock up on dark leafy greens and also cruciferous vegetables, which are all the crunchy vegetables, because those help to metabolize any excess estrogen in the system. So in our society, we have a lot of estrogen-dominant conditions like endometriosis, cysts, and so on. So when people are afflicted with those, a nice thing to do is eat cruciferous vegetables. I love to tell people to do a green smoothie daily, which is really nice. It's a good way to get the perfectly blended and pre-digested greens, and also with some dark berries, say, and some seasonal fruit, like right now pears are around, or apples, and that's a nice way to start off your day, and a wonderful replacement to your coffee.
So if you don't mind, let's summarize a bit in terms of what a good fertility-ready kitchen looks like. You just mentioned making sure that there are nice, crisp green lettuces and veggies. Are there any other things that we can call it Kathryn's kitchen? That Kathryn's fertility-ready kitchen would have in it?
I have a very full fridge right now. I just went grocery shopping. Grocery shopping is about my favorite thing in the world to do. I consider it a meditation. So I think that making sure you always have dark leafy greens and then some low glycemic fruits like berries, apples, and pears. So you have always the ability to make a green smoothie. Also, having some of the basics to make a good soup is a nice thing. So having, your garlic and your onions, so that you can, saute them up and add some broth and some other veggies and blend that up is a nice thing to do. Having some gluten-free bread to make sandwiches. I like to always have eggs because I think they're a great source of B12 and choline. And then the way that I operate is to make a plan for about 5 dinners a week, and then use the leftovers for lunch. I think one of the biggest challenges, especially for people who work, is finding things at restaurants that are compliant. Even though there's a lot on the market now that's gluten-free and a lot of great options out there, it can be challenging. So by making, great dinners at night, you can take the overflow and leftovers to work the next day. And a few ideas for simple dinners, making rice bowls, of course, a simple, once a week, doing a grilled salmon with some veggies and some grains, even some gluten-free pasta. I made a great gluten-free pasta last night with organic chicken sausage and pesto, and that's a recipe that's in the cookbook and is also up on the blog. So making an overabundance of these things and then being able to bring them to work, being able to freeze them. I love to tell people if they do like to cook, making a huge batch of soup on a Sunday, kind of a lovely ritual, and also provides something to snack on throughout the week. Right now, the butternut squash recipe, the butternut squash apple soup recipe that's up on my blog, that's one of our favorites, and it's so simple to make. Just, olive oil, onion, apples, and butternut squash with some chicken stock, organic chicken stock. So simple and the most delicious thing for the fall going into this kind of chilly weather.
I was just about to say that sounds absolutely yummy as the weather is shifting.
Yeah, and I also want to say too is one of the things that comes up a lot is desserts. So I've been making some low glycemic crisps, an apple crisp about once a week, because it's still important if you're a person that likes sweet foods or likes to have dessert, it's still important to include those things. And the back section of the cookbook, there's, I think about 10 to 15 desserts. And they're great, and they use low glycemic sweeteners, and it's just important to continue including foods that you love. A little, square of dark chocolate here and there. These things really create a rhythm that you can enjoy and continue to partake in. And my goal is really to help people clean up their diet and enjoy it so much that they want to do it for the long term.
Kathryn, thank you so much for all of your information that you've given us today. I am sure that some of our listeners will probably be doing a pantry and kitchen overhaul after getting some of this information. Where can people find out more information about you and your work, and what's the best way to get in touch with you about your consultations, your cookbook, and even a DVD?
Yeah, and I've just put up a new website at fertilefoods.com, and you can really find everything you need there in terms of different blogs, different recipes, great products that we're recommending, and certainly I would love to work with anyone one-on-one in a consultation that felt like they needed more support.
Thank you again, everyone, for joining us for yet another edition of Fertility Friends. Our guest today has been nutritional consultant Kathryn Flynn, who is also the author of Cooking for Fertility, Foods to Nourish Your Fertile Soul. It's a book that is a simple approach to eating for fertility, as we've heard some of the great tips that Kathryn has given us today. Until the next time, thanks for joining us.
I hope you found this interview helpful. Please send us any feedback or comments.